A woman is at work fixing a car when two men pour hot coffee on her. She soon gets carried away saying it was too hot and the men start making fun of her. She then asks why they did that to her. They say they did it because she wasn't working properly and they didn't want to work with a woman. She says that being a woman was no reason for them to do that to her and that they should help her. The man then says he doesn't have time to help a woman who can't do her job properly. The woman then leaves to clean herself up and the men go back to making fun of her and laughing about throwing coffee on her. Their boss then appears and the two respectfully greet her. She asks if because they are laughing they have already finished their work. The men then say that their part was ready and that the one who was delaying the work was the woman, because he had not finished his part yet and had already left. The other then says that kind of work was not for a woman, that the woman his boss had hired would not be able to do the job. The boss then says that she will talk to the woman and the men say that she was a little stressed and that she must have a female problem. Soon the woman interrupts the two and asks if they could finish the job by the afternoon. The man then says that his portion was ready and that his boss should talk to the woman. She then congratulates the man and leaves. The woman then arrives and the men tell him to finish his work soon as their boss had asked. She then says that she wouldn't be able to finish the job herself, but the man says he doesn't care and wants the job done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So she goes back to work and starts fixing the car. Sometime later, a customer arrives and calls for the boss. The boss then appears and greets the customer. She asks why he was there and he says he wanted to thank them for the great job they did on his car. He had searched a lot but couldn't find another place as good as this one. She then thanks and compliments him and the customer says he wanted to meet the great mechanics who worked on his car. The boss then calls the two men over so the customer can meet them. The two hear their boss call and go to see what it was. The customer then says that he wants to say thank you for the great job and that the two were excellent professionals. The two then thank the compliment and say they just did their job. The customer then says he will reward the two and takes some cash from his pocket. The men say they cannot accept the money as they have only done their job. The boss then tells them to take the customer's money and they both do. The customer then tells the boss that he wanted to see the invoice for the items used in his car and she hands it to him. Seeing the document, the man starts to get irritated and says that it was absurd, that they used many parts unnecessarily and that his car didn't have so many problems. The boss then says that there must be some misunderstanding and asks the two men to explain the situation. The two then try to explain themselves and end up blaming the woman. They say she was responsible for the parts and they didn't know he had done that. The boss then calls out to the woman. The boss then asks the woman to explain the situation to her, that the customer's car had too many parts that he hadn't asked for. She says she wasn't responsible for the parts part and was working on something else. Hearing this, the two men begin to act suspiciously. The boss then says that she doesn't care about the woman's excuses and that she should get her things and leave, because she was fired. The woman tries to say that she didn't do anything, but the boss doesn't care and tells her to go away. Hearing this, the customer says it wasn't necessary to do that and asks the boss to calm down. He says it was not necessary to fire the woman and that they would find another solution to the problem. The boss then tells the woman to go back to her work and that later the two would talk. The boss says she is at a loss for words for the situation, but the customer says that everything was fine due to the excellent work that was done on his car and that he would come to her office later to sort things out. He then greets the boss and the two men and leaves. Sometime later, the client goes to the boss's office and she asks the reason for his visit. He then sits down angrily and says he's there to talk about some missing parts from his car. The boss then says she doesn't know what the customer was talking about and that he must be mistaken. The client says that he had discovered that the two men, whom the boss is so protective of, were the real culprits. She asks the customer to explain what he was saying, and the customer tells her to compare the parts that were used in her car and those that appear on the invoice, as she would see that they are different parts. The boss then searches for the documents for the parts and starts comparing. She says that wasn't possible and asks how the customer found out. He then says he will explain. Then we are shown that some time ago, the customer spotted the sad woman on the floor. He asks her why she is so sad, and she says she can't take any more being accused of something she didn't do. He asks what happened, and she says that the two men don't respect her as a professional and that they are now accusing her of stealing, which she didn't do. We are also shown that the two men were stealing parts from the workshop. They call for their boss. They say that some parts were missing from the workshop and that they don't know where they are. She says that it wasn't possible for a piece to just disappear from there and that if they were gone, someone should have taken it. The two then say that if their boss was having second thoughts about them, she could look in their bags to verify whether or not they were stealing the parts. She then calls out to the woman and says that even though work hours are almost over, she wanted their bags so she could check. They pick up their bags and the boss starts looking at them one by one. The two men's bags were empty, but when she went to look in the woman's bag, she finds the pieces there and asks what was going on. The woman says she doesn't know how those pieces ended up in her bag, but the boss says she doesn't care about the woman's apologies and asks her to leave and that she was fired. The boss says she was embarrassed by what had happened and the two men say they already knew the woman was a thief. The boss then apologizes to the two men and tells them they can leave. The two then celebrate their plan working. The customer then tells the woman to stay calm and that he has an idea and that everything would be fine. He then takes out his phone and calls a car parts store. He asks if anyone had sold them any pieces recently and they say yes, that two men had sold them pieces. He then asks if they have cameras in the place and if it was possible to send him the footage of the day those pieces were sold. They say yes and the customer thanks the store and hangs up. He tells the woman that everything will be fine. So the customer shows the boss footage from the day the two men went to sell the parts. She is very disappointed in both of them, and the customer says that she now understood what was really going on in her company. She says she is speechless, because there were too many things for her to think about. The customer then says that the two men were humiliating the woman, but the woman says she couldn't imagine they were doing that, as they've worked with her for a long time. He says that what they were doing to the woman was an injustice, as she was an excellent professional, one of the best he had ever seen, and that the boss should reconsider her concepts. She then says she doesn't know what to say, as the two men had worked with her for a long time and the woman was a beginner, so she ended up misjudging her. He then says that the woman had come with him and that the two had a lot to talk about and asks her to come in. She then enters and greets the two. The boss then says that she could tell you what she wanted to talk about. The woman then says that the client had invited him to be a partner in his mechanic company. She accepted and they would cherish respect for women in their new company and excellence in customer service. The boss then apologizes to the woman for everything that had happened between the two and says that she hopes that everything works out for her. The woman then thanks her former boss for her words and she wishes them both good luck. The customer then says goodbye to the boss and says he will keep in touch and leaves with the woman.